Great. So, I want to start by talking about these two arrests we just saw relating to this case in New York and Falun Gong. In your eyes, how is this significant? What does it show us?
Well, I think this is another example of just how the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, is doing all they can to undermine our sovereignty, silence all dissent, even in our country, people that are taking a stand against them that happen to be in America. The FBI calls this, I think they call it transnational regression, or repression. But I want to be clear about what I think this really means. This is a foreign government that is committing crimes against those that it deems to be a threat right here on American soil.
Well, and we also saw other arrests, interestingly, with these, they call them Chinese police stations in New York. We know they're in other countries as well. What do you think it's, in terms of the U.S. government now really taking a stand against them? This does seem to be a big shift. I mean, I can tell you personally, I've been investigating these kinds of networks for a long time, and nothing was really done about them before. Why do you think it's changing now?
So that's a really good question. I think not only are the American people seeing China for what it is, but also members of Congress, people here in Washington, D.C., because of the, I'll just say, aggressive actions that China has been engaged in as of late, seeing that happening not only in our country, but around the world. A lot more attention is being paid to these actions. And I think that this is just, like I said, another example that confirms our suspicions that the CCP is acting in ways that many people are becoming very uncomfortable with. I've said before, and I'll say it again, this just exemplifies why I think the United States should not be a haven from persecution. It should be a haven from persecution, not what they're trying to turn it into, a hunting ground for an authoritarian government. And I'm glad that the DOJ and the FBI have been on their toes on this, doing the right thing, holding them accountable. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to be on alert, because these kinds of things, as you mentioned, with the police stations around the country and other countries too, who knows what else is going on that maybe the American people and members of Congress even aren't aware of yet. So we've got to be vigilant.
Well, the House Committee on China, the one you're with actually, has said the United States is in an existential crisis with China. I mean, would you agree with that? That's a pretty strong statement.
Well, they give us every reason to believe that that's a true statement. The actions by the Chinese Communist Party, by their leader, the things that he's been saying, the threats that he's been making, the actions that he's signaling he's going to take as it relates to Taiwan and other issues, certainly leads me to believe that they are something that we need to be concerned with as a threat.
Well, and I know you yourself, you've taken a pretty strong stance against the CCP, or Chinese nationals, buying U.S. farmland. Why do you think this is something Americans should care about?
Well, that's a trend that we're seeing in other countries around the world, and now starting to see in the United States as well. The number of acres that the Chinese have purchased in the United States have increased by a factor of 10 just in the last decade. And we want to make sure that our food supply, our ability to produce food, is under the control of Americans and not under the control of countries that are not our allies. And so watching this trend, and as I said, seeing what's going on in other countries, we don't want to wake up 5, 10, 20 years from now and think, we should have done something about this. We want to nip this in the bud before it becomes an issue of national security.
Well, it seems like there's a bigger trend happening right now as well. At the G7 meeting just recently, Biden was criticized for it, but I honestly think he was kind of misquoted, to be honest. He came out and he said that we're not going to be decoupling with China, but the other part that I think people didn't pay enough attention to was he said that we would be trying to diversify our relationship. And I think that means that we're going to become less reliant on China. How did you interpret that, and what does that mean for the U.S. going forward?
Well, we're talking about the two largest economies in the world, the United States and China. And for us to completely decouple, that's an almost impossibility. They're a huge market for many of the things that we produce in this country. And obviously, we reciprocate. We buy a lot of things from China. But I think maybe more accurately than decoupling, we should use the term de-risking. We need to lower the risk in this trading relationship that we have. And we're far from that at this point. And so I think the president was making a good point that the risk involved with the way things stand today needs to be addressed, and our relationship needs to be changed.
Well, you know, one of the complicated issues with doing business with China is that American businesses have to play by China's rules. And that has included, for example, handing over, intellectual property. It has included handing over source code. It includes censoring themselves, like we've seen with the NBA. Do you believe this is something that can be resolved at a congressional level or maybe on a business level? How should we deal with this where basic American rights are being undermined through this engagement?
Well, the thing you have to remember about China, Joshua, they don't play by necessarily the same rules that we do in our country. So businessmen that go to China need to have their eyes wide open as far as the risk that they are accepting by doing business in China. And if it does happen that China decides to make a move on Taiwan, the capital invested in that country by American companies, by foreign companies in general, will absolutely be at risk. And so those are things that that's a pretty high level of risk to be acceptable, I would think, for most people.
Yeah. Well, back to the issue of these two arrests in New York. One thing I've touched on is the fact that, Falun Gong used to be a no-go topic. Diplomatically, you bring it up, the Chinese officials get up and walk out of the room. And I'm curious with yourself and others, it seems really criticizing the CCP, including its human rights abuses, whether it's Taiwan or Muslim Uyghurs or Falun Gong. It doesn't seem to be a no-go topic anymore. And what do you think has changed that has really made people not afraid to speak about these issues the CCP does not want to speak about?
Well, I think as we're seeing in this country, like we talked about, the greater attention that's being paid to China and the actions that they are threatening, the actions that they are taking in other countries, more and more people are starting to voice their concerns about this. And groups like the Falun Gong, really, their protests, their criticisms have fallen on deaf ears, primarily in most of the world. China used to try to ignore them as well, but now there's a chorus of voices speaking up, and I think that's a really, really good thing. The Chinese people, they're truly the primary victims of this Chinese Communist government. Did you know that the CCP spends more on internal security than it does on its military? And there's only one reason for that. It sees its people as a bigger threat than other countries, such as the United States. I think that speaks volumes.
Great point. So, Congressman, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.